Okay, so when we think about the Baja California Peninsula, that incredible stretch of land separating the Pacific from the Sea of Cortez, well, most people picture rugged landscapes, maybe tourism.
Uh-huh. And often it gets lumped in with the general U.S.-Mexico border region, culturally or economically.
Right. But what we're diving into today is how genetically and historically Baja California, both the North and South states, is, well, it's kind of an outlier. It has this really deep, unique history.
Exactly. It's got a story of isolation and connection that's quite different from other parts of the northern frontier of Mexico.
That's our focus. We're going to peel back those layers today. We've pulled together insights from, early Jesuit chronicles, some amazing records from the 17th, 18th century.
Yeah, missionaries who are trying to map out who live where.
And we're combining that with the latest paleogenomics, the study of ancient DNA, which is just revolutionizing our understanding of the Americas.
So our mission, really, is to trace this whole arc. We'll look at the ancient indigenous identities, especially these incredibly isolated hunter-gatherers like the Parakeets.
Then we'll see the impact of the colonial era, the cultural shifts, the tragedies.
And finally, how all of that history, that deep past, and the colonial disruption shapes the genetic makeup of people in Mexico, particularly in the Northwest, today. It's a complex picture.
Okay, let's get into it. Where do we start? Maybe with that early historical snapshot. What did the peninsula look like, ethnically, linguistically, back when the Spanish first arrived in force, say the 17th century?
Well, those Jesuit accounts are invaluable here. People like Miguel del Barco, writing around 1768, gave us a pretty clear picture. They saw the peninsula basically divided into three main zones, north to south, based on the dominant indigenous groups.
And the most famous, maybe because of their fate, were the Parakeets, right? Down at the very bottom.
That's right. They were in the southernmost part, Cabo San Lucas area, extending maybe 100 miles or so north, plus islands like San Jose and Espiritu Santo. Real coastal people, hunter-gatherers, adapted to that pretty extreme environment.
Okay, so Parakeets in the south, then moving north.
You get into the Central Peninsula, which was Guaycuro territory. Guaycuro wasn't just one group. It was more like a collection of smaller nations, nacionalías, as they call them. Included groups like the Uxidites, the Coras, Aripes, Monquis. The Uxidites bordered the Parakeets to the north.
For complex middle ground. And then the rest, the big northern part.
That vast northern area, maybe two-thirds of the peninsula, was home to the Cukimis. So you had this really dense linguistic and cultural diversity packed on this long, thin strip of land, almost designed for separation, you could say.
But that separation wasn't enough protection, was it? Against colonialism and especially disease.
No, not at all. The sources, like Del Barco's, paint a really stark picture of cultural loss. He noted that by 1768, the Uchipi Nation, one of those Guaycuro groups, they were just gone, wiped out by wars and repeated epidemics.
Just disappeared. Wow.
Yeah, and other groups like the Parakeets themselves, the Coras, they suffered huge population crashes. It was devastating.
And the languages started vanishing, too.
Absolutely. By 1768, Del Barco was already observing that in key mission areas like Loreto or down south near San Jose del Cabo, the remaining indigenous people were switching to Spanish. Their ancestral languages were fading fast, particularly in the south.
Which makes the story in the north, Baja California Norte, kind of different then.
It does. Up there, you had the Yumano-speaking groups, the Cucapa, Kumeyaay, Kiliwa, Paipai. They managed to hold on, often in more remote mountain or river areas, some straddling what's now the U.S.-Mexico border. There's a continuity there that's incredibly important.
A link to the deeper past. And speaking of the past, what about their own origin stories? Did they have traditions about where they came from?
They did. It's fascinating, actually. Both the Cochimis up north and the Parakeets down south shared a similar tradition recorded by the Jesuits.
Oh, what was the story?
They believed their ancestors originally came from the north, but there was some kind of great conflict, maybe during a large feast, a convite. Their side lost, essentially, and they fled southward down the peninsula, hiding out in the mountains and coasts to escape.
So, a narrative of being pushed into this isolated refuge, whether literal history or metaphor, it definitely speaks to that sense of separation.
Exactly. It frames their identity around finding sanctuary in Baja's isolation.
And that theme of isolation, especially for the Parakeets in the south, provides a perfect segue into the ancient DNA findings, doesn't it? Because the genetics seem to shout isolation too.
They really do. Baja, being part of this broader Arido-America cultural region, has yielded some crucial ancient DNA, or aDNA. And samples from 3 ancient Parakeet individuals are central to this story. They confirm that genetic isolation.
Okay, let's try and unpack the technical side a bit. The studies looked at things like conditional nucleotide diversity, CND, and runs of homozygosity, ROH. What does CND tell us?
Right, so C&D is basically a measure of genetic variety within a population. Think of it like this. If you look at DNA segments from lots of people, are they mostly unique and different, high diversity? Or do lots of people share the same segments, low diversity?
And for the parakeets.
They were at the extreme low end. Their C&D values were the lowest measured compared to any other ancient or even present-day groups studied across Mexico and the Americas, lower than ancient Tarahumara, Maya, Mix, you name it.
Wow, lowest. So very little internal genetic variation.
Precisely. It strongly suggests they had very limited gene flow from outside groups for a really, really long time. They preserved an ancient, highly isolated genetic signature.
Okay, that fits the geography and the origin stories. What about the other measure, ROH? Runs of homozygosity. Sounds complicated.
It sounds technical, but the concept is straightforward. ROH are long stretches in your genome where the DNA you inherited from your mother is identical to the DNA you got from your father. We all have some ROH, but lots of long ROH stretches. That usually means your parents were related, even if distantly.
Ah, okay. So it's a sign of a small population where people are more likely to share recent ancestors.
Exactly. It's a classic genetic marker of small, isolated populations where mating options have been restricted for generations.
And the parakeets had the highest sum of these ROH.
They did. That finding perfectly complements the low CND. It confirms that their low genetic diversity was due to long-term isolation and probably a relatively small population size breeding amongst themselves.
Two sides of the same genetic coin showing deep isolation.
Right. Though it's worth noting, the study suggests their ROH levels, while high, weren't quite as extreme as seen in some ancient Patagonian hunter-gatherers further south. So likely a small, isolated population, but perhaps not on the very brink of viability before European contact.
Still, a very distinct profile compared to, say, central Mexico.
No, absolutely. Compared to ancient Mesoamerican groups who generally show much higher diversity, indicating more movement and mixing, the parakeets stand out dramatically.
So the tip of Baja was like a genetic island. But was the rest of northern Mexico, Arido-America, totally cut off from Mesoamerica further south?
No, not entirely. There's evidence for pre-Hispanic interaction. For example, genetic analysis of an ancient mummy from the Sierra Tarahumara region, designated MOM6STST, showed ancestry components typically found in populations from central West Mexico today.
So even across that rugged north, there was some gene flow happening before the Spanish arrived.
Definitely. Wasn't a complete barrier. Which leads us to maybe the most intriguing part of the recent genetic findings, the ghost populations.
Ghost populations. Okay, sounds mysterious. What are those?
It is pretty cool. A ghost population is basically an ancient group whose existence we can infer genetically, but we haven't actually found or sequenced DNA directly from them yet. Their genetic signal shows up as a component in the DNA of other ancient individuals we have sampled.
Like the genetic shadows. Ancestors we know were there but haven't seen.
That's a great way to put it. For a while, we knew about one called Upopa. Its ancestry was detected in ancient people from both the northern Sierra Tarahumara and way down south in Oaxaca, among the mix. That already hinted at complex ancient movements.
Okay, one ghost population connecting north and south.
But wait, there's more. These recent studies identified evidence for a second, distinct ghost ancestry. They're calling it Upopi-2. And its signal appears in pre-Hispanic individuals from central Mexico, specifically a site called Cañada de la Virgen.
Whoa, okay, so not just one ancient unsampled group contributing DNA, but at least two, Upopi and Upopi-2, affecting different ancient populations.
Exactly. It means the early peopling and population mixing across Mexico, likely going back to the late Pleistocene, was far more complex than simple north-to-south models suggested. There were multiple ancient lineages, moving, mixing, some disappearing, leaving only these genetic echoes.
That really changes the picture of deep American history. Amazing.
Okay, so from ancient isolation and ghost populations, let's shift focus to the modern day and the impact of the colonial period. How does this ancient history connect to the genetic makeup of admixed Mexicans, the mestizo population, including in Baja today?
Right. To understand that, you need to grasp what's called the continental admixture signature. It's a pattern seen across Latin America and tells a powerful story about colonization.
And that signature is clearest when you look at DNA passed down only through the mother or the father, right? Like mitochondrial DNA.
Precisely. If you look at mitochondrial DNA, which comes only from the mother, In modern admixed Mexicans, something like 90% of it belongs to the major indigenous American haplogroups A2, B2, C1, D1. An overwhelming Native American maternal heritage survived. 90%. That's huge. But then you look at the paternal line, the Y
And
chromosome.
it's a completely different story. The Y chromosome lineages are predominantly of Southern European origin,
Right.
Spanish, Portuguese.
So, indigenous mothers, European fathers, broadly speaking. Why such a stark difference? It points to the harsh realities of the conquest and colonial system, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The historical explanation, backed by the genetics, is pretty grim. During the conquest and early colonial period, indigenous men faced disproportionately high mortality from warfare, disease, forced labor, and enslavement. Their opportunities to pass on their Y chromosomes plummeted,
While European men, the conquistadors and colonizers.
were primarily male, and they reproduced with the surviving indigenous women. This means European female contribution to the gene pool was initially quite low, but the indigenous maternal lines continued, carried forward into the mestizo population.
So that colonial dynamic is literally encoded in the DNA of millions today, including in Baja, California.
Yes, but even within modern Mexico, it's not uniform. There's significant genetic structure. If you map genetic variation, you generally see a cline, a gradient, from north to southeast.
Meaning populations in different regions have different mixes.
Right. For instance, populations in the Maya region, Chiapas, Yucatan, often show higher percentages of indigenous ancestry and greater genetic distance from other regions. The colonial experience wasn't the same everywhere.
And how does Baja fit into that modern picture, being in the north?
Well, the North has its own nuances. Studies suggest that the initial founder effects in the first wave of European colonists were perhaps strongest in central and southern areas, like Oaxaca or the Maya lands.
Okay, so the first impact was deeper there.
But importantly, population growth continued more robustly after the initial colonial shock in the West, and especially in the North, including the Baja Peninsula. This involved later waves of migration, internal movement, economic development.
Meaning the specific genetic mix in Baja today reflects not just the initial conquest, but also these later, more sustained population dynamics common to the northern states.
Exactly. So while Baja's population is certainly part of the broader mestizo pattern, its specific blend of indigenous, European, and sometimes African ancestry reflects that distinct northern trajectory of settlement and growth. It's part of Mexico's genetic mosaic.
It shows how DNA doesn't just tell us who our ancestors were, but also reveals clues about when and how different populations came together in different places. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. Thinking about the Baja Peninsula, this long, isolated finger of land. What's the main takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is how Baja embodies these two almost contrasting major themes in Mexican history. On one hand, its deep past shows extreme isolation.
Right, the Paracues at the southern tip with that record-low genetic diversity acting as a kind of terminus for ancient migrations.
Exactly, a unique refuge preserving very old genetic lineages. That's one truth.
Then the other truth
is that despite that ancient isolation, modern Baja fully participates in the continent-wide story of colonial admixture. Its population today carries that characteristic signature, the strong indigenous maternal legacy, combined with European paternal lines that defines mestizo Mexico.
So it held on to an incredibly ancient, isolated past, but its more recent history ties it firmly into the broader narrative of post-contact Mexico.
Precisely. It's a place where deep time isolation meets the complex, continent-spanning forces of the last 500 years.
And maybe the most mind-bending part, linking back to that deep time, are those ghost populations, Yupopiae and Yupoke-2. They really throw a wrench in simple stories of how the Americas were peopled.
They absolutely do. Finding evidence for not one, but two distinct, previously unknown ancestral populations contributing to ancient Mexicans challenges everything. It suggests multiple waves, complex interactions, and perhaps lost branches of the human family tree right here in the Americas, going way back into the Pleistocene.
Which leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? For you, listening, to think about. If we're just now finding these ghost ancestries, Yupope and Yupape-2, in relatively well-studied areas of northern and central Mexico, well, how many other ancient unsampled populations might still be out there?
Could their genetic signals be preserved in the most remote corners of the continent? Perhaps even in the yet-to-be-fully analyzed ancient remains from places like the rugged mountains of the Baja Peninsula itself? Could those isolates hold keys to even earlier chapters of human history in the Americas?